Welcome back to my Vampire the Masquerade Bloodhunt History of Prague series. We left off in the previous video at the close of the 17th century and a relatively calm period for the city's kindred. As we enter more modern nights, you will start to see events unfold that will have a direct impact on things leading up to Bloodhunt, as well as possible story threads that could be picked up by the game. With that in mind, we re-enter Prague in the mid-20th century. The rule of Joseph Zvi made the city one of the most accepting places for Nosferatu to dwell. Zvi's alliance with the still-dormant Chagra continued, and he managed to keep the sleeping Methuselah at bay. Ultimately, both met their final death during World War II, Joseph at the hands of a Nazi flamethrower as he fought to resist the occupation of the city, and Chagra to a bomb from an air raid that hit her resting place and burned her to ash. Following the death of Joseph, the title of prince was taken up by Vasily, a member of Clan Toreador. Despite the death of the ancient Chagra, Prague still faced many dangers. The end of the war saw the rise of the USSR, and turmoil plagued the early years of Vasily's reign. Between the greater country's dire environmental problems, lupines in the surrounding forests, and the Zamichi-goaded Sabbat casting ravenous eyes upon the city. The Sabbat are another sect of vampires, but unlike the Camarilla and the Anarchs, they have no use for the traditions and value the destruction of the antediluvians above all other concerns. The new prince had a lot to take on, and this ultimately led Vasily to forge close diplomatic ties with Germany as well as seeking other outside aid. One such source of aid came, surprisingly, from Janek Rytka, voivode of Kokorin. The Zamichi lord took great pains to protect his domain during the various turmoils the region saw between the two world wars and the yoke of the USSR. He eventually developed a formal understanding with Prince Vasily of Prague that the Camarilla would steer clear of any land he claimed, and in turn, Janek would abstain from all Camarilla lands and affairs, and would also give no aid or protection to the Sabbat, whose Zamichi lords greatly desired to reclaim the city. Janek, being of old clan Zamichi, saw the petty dealings of the Camarilla and the Sabbat as beneath him, and destroyed any from either side who dared enter his domain. He was no fool, however, and saw the sway that the other kindred had over mortal affairs, and carefully acquired pawns within the communist leadership of the time, allowing him to establish his home as being off-limits to the mortals. Near the end of the communist rule of the region and the fall of the Berlin Wall in the late 1980s, a known dissident and freedom fighter in Prague by the name of Jaromír Černý was captured by the STB, the secret police force of communist Czechoslovakia, and taken to Kokorin Castle outside the city. There he was forced to wait for hours upon the whims of the castle's lord. The speed at which the revolution in Czechoslovakia approached surprised the ancient fiend, and he knew that he could not prevent the rise of democratic powers in the region. Upon revealing himself at last and explaining his purpose to the young man, Janek gave Jaromír a choice: to become his arm in this burgeoning movement and gain the loyalty of its leaders in service to Janek, or perish. The choice was simple for Jaromír, and he was embraced by the elder vampire. Through enslavement to his blood, Černý brought the leaders of the Velvet Revolution under his sway in service to his master. By the time the communist government was dissolved, Černý had more than a dozen ghouls within the new government to ensure that his master's lands remained safe. Though Prince Vasily decreed that Jaromír be banished from the city for his intrusive campaign during the revolution and his flagrant disregard of the traditions, both Jaromír and Janek paid little heed to his threats. The fledgling maintained a haven within the city and continues to avoid the ire of the Camarilla well into modern nights. In 1990, a venture-backed mining company reopened a forgotten mine outside the city. A nearby roaming Sabbat pack ventured into it and discovered the last of the Salubri warrior caste. In an exceedingly rare display, the pack chose to revive the sleeping vampires instead of destroying them. This ultimately led to the proliferation of the warrior caste Salubri among the Sabbat. In 1998, Vasily was deposed by Karlak, a Bruja and former Justicar for the Camarilla who returned to his home city to settle down after retiring from the position. Vasily had a great distrust for all Bruja due to the turmoil and revolutions instigated by the clan over the course of the past 5 decades, and demanded that Karlak depart the city and never return, accusing the Bruja of seeking his position. Karlak, still frustrated from what he saw as his failures as a Justicar, flew into a rage and beat Vasily bare-handed until the Toreador fell into torpor. Karlak then summoned the Primogen Council of the city and extracted promises of support from them, claiming the title of prince for himself. Karlak chained Vasily's body into a casket and sealed him behind a wall in the lowest levels of Castle Prague, where he remains to this day. Around the same time, Vukadlak's remains were removed from Vyšehrad Castle and transported to New York City. Labusha and the remainder of his entourage accompanied him, where his plotting continued until he was ultimately vanquished at the turn of the century. The onset of the 21st century saw yet more excitement for the region when the 4th generation gangrel Methuselah Enkidu was tracked to the forest near the city. An ancient being, they were believed to possess the power of their sire to absorb the body of an animal to preserve it within their own flesh. However, Enkidu was unable to withstand the toll the process had on maintaining control of their beast. This being was on the Red List, a most wanted list maintained by the Camarilla, and had been hunted in years past, but had always managed to kill their pursuers. A special team of Alisters, a kindred secret police force whose sole purpose is to hunt down those on the Red List, and other top warriors were sent to hunt them down. They found Enkidu near Prague. The battle reportedly lasted from dusk until dawn and involved over 30 kindred and a number of ghouls. Though the official record states that the gangrel was slain, no one will actually admit to seeing Enkidu die, and all who were present refused to speak further of the event. In 2012, the Camarilla held a conclave in Prague. Disguised as a European Economic Summit, it gathered an international assortment of some of the highest-ranking members of the sect. During this gathering, the Bruja clan, led by a prominent clan member, Theo Bell, staged a revolt. Tired of being treated like a lapdog by the Ventru, Theo declared his dissent by abruptly removing the face of the Ventru elder Hardstadt with a sawed-off shotgun loaded with deadly dragon's breath ammo. This triggered a surprise attack by other Bruja at the conclave that resulted in the deaths of nearly every Ventru present. The event sent a shockwave through the kindred world, inciting other Bruja to exit the Camarilla. Though some Bruja remain within the Camarilla, the majority have now declared for the Anarch movement. In the aftermath of the events of 2012, Karlak abdicated his position as prince. He was soon replaced by Marcus of Clan Ventru. Marcus had been active in Prague since World War II and was partly responsible for the return of prominence in the city for his clan. He gained station with the onset of the Beckoning and the loss of various elders to its call, allowing him to earn a spot on the Primogen Council. As prince, Marcus managed to balance local Camarilla and Anarch interests to keep the region peaceful, granting the Anarchs a free zone in the suburbs of the city. Nearly a decade after the historic events at the Convention of Prague, Marcus called a new convention, now known as the Second Convention of Prague. Once more, the Camarilla and Anarchs gathered in the city, this time under the guise of a human rights summit put on by Maya, Harpy and Primogen of the city's Toreador. In order to keep up appearances, Marcus put forth a decree 2 months before the meeting that any breach of the Masquerade, whether from Camarilla or Anarch, would be met with swift and severe punishment in the form of a blood hunt called on the offending kindred without trial. Publicly, this new convention was intended to calm the Anarchs and possibly bring them back into the fold of the Camarilla, though privately many speculated that it would likely serve as a means for the prince to show off his achievements in keeping the peace with the rebels. The Anarchs' tempers flared, believing that they were being called forth to give a chance to ask forgiveness and to beg to be let back into the Camarilla. It was even believed that a condition for re-entry into the sect would come at the cost of turning over Theo Bell to answer for his crimes. Though many Anarchs were present at the meeting, more still protested the meeting using the guise of the summit to voice their disapproval. Despite this, the convention took place, and though the atmosphere was tense and distrust at an all-time high, it is reported that an agreement was close at hand. Unfortunately, it was not to be. Members of the Vatican force of vampire hunters known as the Entity caught wind of the meeting and attacked the Prince's Haven, the current Prague Elysium and location of the talks, in the final moments. The Entity was tipped off by an unidentified Anarch referred to only as Blank Body A387, whose actions they had been monitoring closely for some time. Unaware he was being tracked, Entity had used him to purge multiple havens in the Berlin region where they originated. The Entity forces were given permission to leave the kindred alive to continue surveillance as they were utterly unaware of the carnage they had facilitated and were a minimal threat to mortals preferring non-human blood. During this operation, A387 made use of a closed social media group for local Anarchs, Berliner Licks, to post about meeting a chick lick and being invited to an important Anarch cam meeting, and catching multiple trains to get there, though not revealing where there was. Once the assault started, chaos ensued. Kindred fought and burned for their efforts. Very few escaped. During the chaos, the prince went missing. He fought alongside Kirill, sheriff and reluctant Bruja Primogen, but they were separated during the battle. Very few Camarilla officials managed to regroup at the Old Elysium housed under Castle Prague. Though unaware of how the mortals discovered the meeting place, the majority are certain it was a betrayal by the Anarchs that brought destruction down on them for a second time. They have declared a blood hunt on all Anarchs, asserting that the prince's months-old decree still stands. They believe that if all Anarchs can be purged from the city and the Camarilla goes to ground, the Entity will be satisfied with the number of vampires killed and leave, allowing the Camarilla to restore the Masquerade and impose order once more. The early access season of Bloodhunt starts on the first night after the events of the Second Convention, with the hunt for the Anarchs starting in earnest. Only time will tell what other surprises Prague has in store for the kindred that find themselves there. As the story progresses significantly, or provides sufficient detail, I'll continue this series as events unfold. I left out some of the things that were revealed in the 0.5 and 0.6 patches, as I did most of the recording for this video before they were released. There is also some minor detail missing relating to the history of some of the NPCs featured in the game, as a lot of it is hearsay or minimalistic at the moment. I will do character videos at some point to cover their individual histories as time and details allow. If you have requests for future videos, please drop me a message in the comments section and let me know.